All right, good morning, everyone. So we're going to get started today. We're continuing our class series on your role in the body. 3 weeks ago, we did an introduction. 2 weeks ago, we talked about missionaries, and then this week we'll be talking about evangelists, which is the passion of proclamation. So, some ground rules that we need to go through. A little soft. Shocking. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Multitasking, right? Okay, so it sounds a lot louder to me now. But anyway, okay, ground rules. I want to go over this every time just to make sure that we're on the same page as to the purpose of the class. And so the synopsis, this class will provide a practical guide to applying your God-given gifts to help others and to effectively serve in the church body. The goal is to stir up action in individuals by using their gifts in unity with the whole body. Again, that is the primary focus of this class, is to, if you're not sure what your gift is, to help you come to an understanding of that, or to help others find their gift as well. When we talk about gifts, this is defined as the combination of God-given talent and passion. So I think in the introduction, I mentioned that my dad, my middle brother, and I are all, so I'm trying to find this text thread. My dad, my middle brother, and I are all accountants. So my dad's a CPA, my middle brother and I have master's degrees in accounting, so our skill set is very similar, but when it comes to our passion or the things, our desires, when it comes to this stuff, that's going to separate then the gifts that we have. So I've talked about how my top one is teacher, then administrator. My dad's top one was shepherd, then administrator. My middle brother's top one was shepherd and then giver. But there are a lot of similarities kind of in the top four that we had and also in the bottom. But it is a little bit different based on the things that we think are important or the things that we really enjoy. The three lenses, we're going to change up how we do this time, so we're going to look at them as we go as opposed to saving them all for the end. But I want to look at each gift through the lens of the church body as a whole. How does the church do evangelism, as we're talking about today? Helping other individuals. So how can you help encourage someone who has the gift of evangelism, or mentor someone, or point out to them that they may have this gift? And then finally, yourself. And so, do you have the gift of evangelism? And if so, how can we use it more effectively? Finally, love and unity. If the gifts are not used in love and are not used in unity within the body, then they're worthless. So be mindful of and celebrate the diversity of our giftedness. We talked about the body several weeks ago in our introduction. It's in Romans chapter 12 and 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And from our discussion, we determined that all of us have gifts and we are all expected to use them. All gifts are useful and necessary for the functioning of the body. The unseen gifts might be the most impactful. I've gone into this in more detail in prior classes, so I'm just going to kind of go through them now. Gifts should be used in love. Again, if you're not doing that in love, even if you're the greatest evangelist ever, but if you're smacking people over the head with the Bible, it's probably not going to go over very well, right? Be humble in your gift. If you've baptized 50 people in the last year, that doesn't necessarily make you any better than someone else who is also an evangelist who has not baptized anyone this year. That we're all trying to use our gifts as effectively as we can to serve the body. And then finally, on the flip side, don't be afraid to use your gift, even if you think it's unimportant or someone is better at using that gift than you. So again, if you see someone who is really good at evangelism and you have that gift, but you're not sure about it, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to use your gift, right? Just because someone might be doing it more effectively than you doesn't mean that you can't be effective as well, whether or not the impact is as great or not, or whatever the case may be. And oftentimes we are harder on ourselves than on others. So, all that being said, we're talking about evangelists today. So Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 says he gave some as, it's the listing, and in that list includes evangelists. I think I want to also include verse 12. So the purpose of this is, then verse 12, is for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. So again, that's why I titled this series, Your Role in the Body. So the purpose of these gifts is to build up the body, and it's to equip others in the work of ministry. According to Doug Hamilton's book, I realized last time I didn't plug the book enough, so Spiritual Giftedness by Doug Hamilton is $15 on Amazon. So if you really enjoy the class, this is kind of where I got a big chunk of the material from. If you don't enjoy the class, buy the book because he's going to say it better than I do. So either way, I would suggest supporting the author. I'll also mention now, Doug is his highest is evangelist, and so when we talk through a little bit later kind of their motivations, that's the genesis of a lot of it is from what he views being an evangelist as being like. But according to his testing results, roughly 9% of people have this gift. So what is an evangelist? I think there are a lot of different definitions out there based on how you grew up, the church you grew up in, maybe something that you inferred based on what someone said. I was thinking about this, not a lot, but off and on this past week. I think if you were to ask someone what an evangelist is, a lot of people would either say local, like local missionary, maybe for lack of a better term, someone who's doing the work locally, going out and doing door-knocking campaigns and things like that. Or we think of an evangelist as someone who is preaching from the pulpit. So you can preach and be an evangelist, but that's not like all it's limited to. And you can be an evangelist locally, but that's not all that being an evangelist is limited to. So I think that we kind of combine some terms and again, maybe have different definitions. So the Greek word for this means a bringer of good tidings, which is the good news or the gospel. Another dictionary that I looked at said one whose job was to travel and proclaim the gospel. So again, when we talk about good news or the gospel, we're talking about the death, burial, and resurrection. So when I was in graduate school at Wichita State, I was walking on campus one day. All the classes in graduate school are at night, so it's like 7 o'clock at night, going from the parking lot to the business building. All I'm thinking of is this 800 level accounting course that I'm taking, and there's a group of people in kind of the commons area. And I made the mistake of making eye contact with one of them as I was walking by. And so it's this girl who's probably a late high school or early college age, and she looks really nervous as I start walking up, and I can tell that she's wanting to talk to me. So she's like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? I'm like, sure. And she goes, have you heard of the good news? And again, I'm not in the mindset of Christianity, Bible, things like that, and I'm just like, what's the good news? And she said, well, and so she starts explaining, it's the death, burial, and resurrection, right? Oh, Jesus came to this earth, and he died for us, and if we're in and I'm like, oh, I feel like an idiot right now because I didn't understand that's what she was talking about. So I had to cut her off after a couple minutes and be like, I have a class, I'm not joking with you, I have a class in 5 minutes I need to be at. I'm also a Christian. I believe everything you're saying, we're on the same page, bye. So whenever I think of the good news, that always pops into my head. Go ahead, Mike.
Looking up the definition, one of the definitions that I did find, it said it is a person or a person that is passionate about delivering the message.
Yes.
So in that case, I mean, she was passionate about doing that.
Oh, agree 100%. Yes. So 1 Corinthians 15, verses 1 through 4. I think this is a good summary of what it is, summarized by Paul. It says, now I make known to you, brothers and sisters, the gospel which I preached to you, which you also received, in which you also stand, by which also you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I handed down to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures. So I think all of us understand that the gospel message isn't automatically downloaded to our brains, right? So we talk about the path to salvation. Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized, live faithful. That first step is hearing. And so, obviously, in order for someone to hear, someone needs to tell them. And so as Mike was saying, that is what the passion is of the evangelist, is to be that person who goes out and tells others. So their primary role is to spread the good news to everyone that they come across. Romans chapter 10, verses 14 through 15 says, how then are they to call on him in whom they have not believed? How are they to believe in him whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without a preacher? But how are they to preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news of good things. So again, we're talking about all this in context of the body, right? The body has many functions, many different parts, and they all function together. So again, the primary role of the evangelist is to bring that salvation, is to start the salvation process. And that's what they're concerned about. So this, again, differs from other gifts. And we talked about missionaries last week and how some of these can be very similar, but just as like your feet and your hands can be similar, right? There's 5 fingers, 5 toes. There's nails on all of them. You can technically walk on both. But the primary purpose of each one is different, but they are kind of similar. So in that way, like teaching can include talking about the death, burial, and resurrection, but that's not the primary motivation. It's about passing on the knowledge that you've gained to other people. And missionaries, as we talked about, is primarily about going to places where the Bible is not and planting a church and building something sustainable there, although that does include evangelizing to the people while you're there. I want to have plenty of time for discussion at the end, so I'm just going to go through some of this. So again, just as the missionary has a passion or an unquenchable desire to take the message to areas of the world where it's not prevalent, the evangelist has a passion or an unquenchable desire to tell everyone they come into contact with about the gospel message. So it isn't necessarily, again, it's a little bit different than missionaries in that they're not necessarily wanting to go and plant a church and go through all that part of it. It's more just about having that conversation with everyone they come across. And again, it doesn't have to just be from the pulpit. It doesn't just have to be on a specific door-knocking campaign or something where you're specifically going out to do that. It's more that my understanding is that they can't help but tell people when they're standing in line at the coffee shop to start a conversation with them, and then turn that into talking about the death, burial, and resurrection. When they're at work and just talking to a coworker, they can't help but bringing that up. When they're at school, anywhere that they're at, they just can't help but telling other people about Jesus. The primary message is Christ crucified. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2 says, "For I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." So again, sometimes those of us who are higher in the teacher, we like to dive into all the details and get down into the weeds and try to figure things out. But the primary message of the evangelist is simple. It's Christ crucified. And that's not to say that they only do that or that they can't get more detailed, but at the end of the day, this is their concern, is that preaching that, giving that message to others. But we'll talk about the downside, potentially, of that in just a little bit. And again, they can't fathom staying silent about the gospel message. So they feel compelled to preach and to do that. So 1 Corinthians 9:16 says, "For woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." So again, as I said in the book, Doug is an evangelist. That's the gift that he tests highest in, that is his gift. And he referred to the evangelists as the salesmen and saleswomen of the body. So they're the ones getting out there and trying to spread the message to other people, and that they're very persistent in doing so, and they don't always take no for an answer. Some examples. Jesus is always a good example, right? So Luke chapter 8, verse 1, "Soon afterward Jesus began going around from one city and village to another, proclaiming and preaching the kingdom of God." Paul in Romans 1, verse 15 says, "So for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome." Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5 says, "But as for you, use your strength in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry." And my understanding is that the word evangelist there is the exact same Greek word used in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. There are many unnamed disciples in Acts chapter 8, verse 4. "Therefore those who have been scattered went through the places preaching the word." And then the other instance where the exact Greek word is used is here in Acts chapter 21, verse 8, which says, "On the next day we left and came to Caesarea, and we entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who is one of the 7, and stayed with them." I have on here, who else can you think of? But I want to move on to, I think, discussion that will be more helpful for all of us. Okay, so here's where I'm changing it up a little bit. So, self-assessment. So, I'm going to put up a bunch of sentences on the board. If this relates really closely to you, let us know. I love being the bearer of good news for others. I readily share information about my beliefs. I look for better ways to communicate my thoughts. I'm concerned about making a good first impression. I make friends quickly. I'm comfortable pressing people to make a decision. I tend to be the life of the party. And I love to debate. Does this describe any of you to a T? No one? No one in here?
All of it?
That's all of it, right? Yeah.
No, I mean, is all of it what's supposed to describe us to a T?
The vast majority.
Okay. I would say within the lens of sharing the gospel, a good portion of the latter aspects need to kind of be bludgeoned, put in a bag, and left outside. I'm just saying, I'm trying to be funny, obviously, but the love of debate should not be part of that. Paul, I think, could have debated better than any of them, but he took his time up on Mars Hill. Life of the party, gosh. Sometimes better to be the life of the party than the death of the party. But as a person who likes to keep people happy when I talk to them, I would go up to bearer of good news, information about my beliefs. Yes, I've actually learned to communicate my thoughts differently and in different languages. I am concerned about making a good first impression, but the outcome, if I'm trying to do the right thing, is not what I'm worried about. So, and you can read real quick if you've upset somebody or not. So then would be I do make friends quickly, but then I would say define friend. But that's all I got to say.
Well, I'm going to ask you for more here in a second. So in thinking about like each of these gifts, usually someone or two people or three people in the congregation popped up into my head. I'm not going to lie, Kevin was one of them, and Hans was the other one that this popped up for me. That's not to say that that's absolutely like what you are, but just reading, not necessarily reading through this, but thinking through it and reading through it, because you talk all the time about telling others that you work with or that you just interact with constantly because you have that, you really want them to be saved, right? And so I guess tell us more about what is the primary motivation when you're going into a conversation with someone. Oh, Mike.
Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you, sorry.
He's asking me. Okay. Because I can tell if they're in pain. Because I've been talking to them long enough, you can read their facial, you can see somebody who's begging, they don't necessarily believe in God, but they're begging to be pregnant. And they're begging because the first 4 times didn't work out. And so you can take that and share with them even how to pick a name of a baby that may not be deliverable. And so it's really just focusing on asking. Try to remember if you ask them if they said, "Oh yeah, I'm moving to Wichita. I won't be in the hardware department anymore." Why? Oh well, I made it through the exam, and now I've got somebody who's gonna. It's those things that you pick their story to be able to tell Christ's story, and it's not hard to do if they're not offended by your presence. Now, believe it or not, I don't offend most people by my presence, and I try not to. That would go back to making good first impressions. But for me, I'm reading the person constantly, and I will tell you it takes a lot of energy. I don't want to go into energia and what that means, and is it God? Yes, it's God giving me the energy, but it will wear me out. Christ got worn out in human form at times, so. You got to read the person and be willing to talk to them, to interject what Christ has done in your life as well.
Gotcha. Thank you. Anyone else have questions for Hans or other or other things you want to input? We're wanting to learn from you, right?
A couple things popped out. I feel like Hans mentioned debate in a negative connotation, but you can have debate with people and just have a discussion back and forth, and I think sometimes I consider that debate. I would actually, if I'm honest with myself, a lot of these do fit, I feel like myself, and you don't have the capital good news. I don't know if that matters, but as far as just talking to people, but what Hans was saying about reading people, I would say maybe as I've gotten older, there is some sense of that reading people, and if they have the ears to hear things, and not just in with good news, the good news of the gospel, but with life issues. If they don't have the ears to hear what you're saying, I think a lot of times I don't speak it. So if they're teachable, then I'm willing to share some of those hard truths with them, and they accept it, and then it goes from there, I guess.
Yeah, so we talked about, or we're going to talk about what maturity in the gift looks like. And so I think that's what you're getting at, right? That maybe those conversations, maybe that debate, and it also, again, I was going to say this earlier, Hans, it all ties back to using your gift in love. So if you're coming into a debate and you're coming in really strong and trying to overpower the other person, that's not going to work out. But if it's more a discussion, not necessarily a debate, that's where you start to mature in your gift. And use it. So I'm trying to remember what his name was. There was someone who was here when we first started. He was in the military, had like 8 kids, but then moved away. So it probably would have been about 10 years ago. No, not Dwayne. It was someone else. Pete Garcia. That was his name. So he was doing a lesson up here one time, and this always stuck with me. He said, I used to use the Bible as a hammer, and a sledgehammer, and I realized I need to use it more like a sword. So I think that might be also a bit of a maturity thing as well. Kathy?
I'm sorry, I get really nervous talking on a microphone, but when I look at this, I look at Jesus as my example. And I don't think any of those up there, except the first one, that he loves to tell the good news. He didn't worry about if he was making friends. He came to do a message.
That's true, yeah.
So for making friends, maybe a better way to say that is to make connection with people, because you don't necessarily have to be friends with them to communicate the gospel, but you do have to connect with them to be able to communicate with them, which is the first thing that Kevin will tell you when he starts talking about the basics of communication, right? Mm-hmm. And Jesus very quickly made connections with people, even the Pharisees, for instance, because he'd grown up seeing them. He knew what they were about. For debate, calling that a discussion, I think we should avoid that. Just use the word debate. That's exactly what Scripture says Paul and Apollos did. And debate does not have to be acrimonious. You don't have to be overpowering in a debate, but debate is also more than standing on a stage and repeating talking points and canned lines, which is the way that we usually see it now. So when Scripture talks about debate, it means something very different from what we see. And so we need to throw that out in a bag, as Hans said, about a couple of things, and go back to it being a reasoned conversation, structured in some ways, but actually responding to what other people are saying and defending and things like that.
Yeah, and that's fair. So probably will surprise a bunch of people, but I actually did debate in high school. And so as you can imagine, my style was not the yell at people and get mad and all that kind of stuff. It was more just about like this. So, so I agree that, yes, debate means that. I know that there are people who have the connotation of the debate meaning more than that, but that's a good point.
So I feel like we're coming at this from the wrong angle in looking at the gift of evangelism, and it's like, I need to be able to do all these things. It's opposite. Do you have any of these things? You could possibly be good at the gift of evangelism.
Yes. Agreed. And that's, sorry, I was a lot of different ways I'm wanting to go with some of this, but I would agree with that. This is more like, do you fit these general descriptions? And if so, then you're more likely to have the gift of evangelism. It's not just like go ahead.
These are questions you have to ask yourselves and answer it to yourself to see whether you're available. And a lot of times we'll use some of these as an excuse. I'm afraid, if I'm introverted, I'm afraid that I might not make the first good impression, so therefore I don't even try. So oftentimes we'll try to rationalize ourselves out of it, where we should be trying to rationalize ourselves into it, becoming a person that develops those abilities and skills.
That's true. It was a sample size of 1, so Aaron might not enjoy that, might not say it's a valid form of research. But I did this with the teaching one, and I would say that, like, how many are up there? 8? Somewhere around there? I would say that, like, 6 or 7 of them hit for me as teachers. So that's why I'm like, well, I would assume that if you, making an assumption, but if you're high in evangelist, a lot of these would fit you, but maybe not literally every one is exactly you. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good thing to go ahead and do some self-evaluation and to identify, obviously, your strengths and to understand, what you're likely to be better at. But you really need to be a generalist as well. I am not good at going out and meeting people and, discussing anything, Christ or anything else, with folks that I've, never seen before in my life. But I need to be good enough at it to where I can at least get hopefully a hook set and say, hey, I've got a phone number for a guy that, would dearly love to talk to you and, make a connection and go on from there. So that, it's like several months ago I was talking with my boss, and he said, well, you got tomorrow off. What are you going to be doing? Well, I've actually, got the sewing machine out. I'm working on, sewing some vests, and, with all the other stuff that I go, he's just like, Mr. Jergensmeyer, you are a man of many parts. So that's kind of where we need to be here. We need to be enough of a generalist to take any one of these gifts that we're going to be talking about and at least make a good stab at them, but also, be aware that there are others out there that are better, and, we can facilitate that connection.
Yes, I would agree that of the 10 that we're going to talk about, I don't want to put a number on it. You should probably be doing most of those things, like, at one point or another, but I agree that because I know that I have evangelized before, I would not call myself, like, I wouldn't say that that's my gift. That's the thing that I'm really good at, or anything like that, or even really desire to do. I desire that everybody would know the gospel message, but it's not my desire to be, like, having those conversations with people. Hans wants the mic.
The other thing is that some people are far better one-on-one or in a small group.
Yes.
And then some people prefer a challenge, so that, 300, 3,000, that's probably what they're more into. But that is, we're all capable of sharing the gospel. Just some do it better and are more comfortable, and that is good on one-on-one, 3, 5, and then.
Yes, agreed. All right, signs of maturity and immaturity. Oh, David has, no. You sure? Oh, okay. Okay, so signs of maturity in an evangelist, they are personable. So they generally get along well with others, they're generally more tolerant of others, and they generally are more upfront with others. So nobody is a stranger, they don't take no for an answer, and they're persistent about proving the evidence of Jesus' resurrection. They're motivating, so they're expressive in speech, extrovert in personality, extreme in persuasion, and energized in work and expectant in goals. And then finally, they're vocal. So they love to talk about the crucifixion, they love to talk about salvation, and they love to talk about eternity. So Kevin one time got me on this. So just thinking through, like, how, again, I don't know if evangelism is his gift. I think he's pretty high in it, or at least he's made himself pretty good at it. So one time he and I were meeting to talk about a lesson a sermon that I had coming up in a week or so. And he, as you know, I have tattoos, and so he goes, "Can you tell me about those? What was the reason why you got them?" And so, of course, I was like, "Oh, well, I started going into it and explaining it in detail and how I thought through it and all these other things and how I decided." And then he essentially told me, yeah, that's a really good conversation starter because people often get them for a very specific reason, and so you can make that connection with them really quickly. Or people who have, told me a story about someone who had a really interesting piercing, and he's like, "Can you tell me more? Why would you decide to get that?" Kind of in a funny way. And then that got them talking about someone he'd never met before, got them talking, and then he was able to then share the gospel message with them because he built that first connection with them. Immaturity. So they're emotional. They tend to be up and down. They tend to be overly expressive. They tend to be loners. They're impulsive, so they tend to be impatient, tend to interrupt conversations, and tend to act without thinking. And then intent. I say intent? Ugh. Intense. Forgot the S, one of the S's in there. So they're intense. They tend to push others too hard. They tend to be insensitive, and they tend to overwork. So there's a story in here I thought that was interesting, and I was trying to recall it last night to say it, and it wasn't going well, so I'm just going to read it. So there's a story about a young preacher who had a deep passion for the gospel. Every sermon he preached was about the death, burial, and resurrection and baptism into Christ. This went on for about 6 months, and some of the members of the congregation grew frustrated. The elders had a meeting with him and emphasized the need to also cover something else from the Bible besides the gospel. The preacher said, okay, and promised to teach a different sermon the next week. The following Sunday morning, he announced the title of his sermon, Lessons from Noah and the Ark. He went into detail of the prevailing wickedness of mankind, the need for God to wipe them out. He explained further about the construction of the ark, the falling rain, and the rising water. Pausing for a moment, he revved up his voice and said, now that we're talking about water, let me tell you about what Peter said about baptism and the ark in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 21. So you get the point. Telling an immature evangelist to talk about something other than the gospel is like telling a baby not to cry. It can often take years to mature past that point with the gift of evangelism. I often say your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. That's one of the things that I'm really finding to be true. And so if your strength is telling everybody about the death, burial, and resurrection, sometimes the weakness is you're telling everyone about the death, burial, and resurrection, right? Even people who agree with you and are ready to move on to a more in-depth discussion. Okay, so some ideas for if you are high in the gift of evangelism. Like I said, Doug is an evangelist, and he puts door-knocking campaigns on several of these, which I think is funny. So door-knocking campaigns. So that's because evangelists love new prospects and know how to quickly start a conversation, it's like we just talked about. Home Bible studies with the lost. So evangelists are at home when they're studying the Bible in someone else's home. Short or long-term mission trips. There's literally a whole world of opportunity out there. I think also, so I said 2 weeks ago I've been on 5 mission trips to Honduras. The attitude that people have there is much different than here. So here in the U.S., oftentimes people at least know what Christianity is for the most part. Maybe not literally every time, but generally they know about it. And it's very possible that they have a strong opinion one way or the other. You know, they grew up with someone who was a hypocrite and they were a Christian and they're a hypocrite, and now they can't understand how anyone would be a Christian. That's not necessarily the case as much when you go into areas of the world where Christianity is not as prevalent. And so they're more receptive to the gospel. So if you're high in evangelism, then joining a mission trip to go talk to people who are more receptive to the gospel can kind of help you to get jump-started. Or just being part of a campaign where that was successful, even if maybe, again, it's not about how many people you put in the water, right? But if, say, you weren't the one who specifically did that, but there were a whole bunch of baptisms and you're part of that, then that can also help energize you and get you jump-started. Studies with young Christians. So again, we talked earlier, or just a minute ago, about how people who have been a Christian for 40, 50, 60 plus years, they agree with the death, burial, and resurrection, right? So, and they might be wanting to look a little bit deeper with that, but a young Christian might need to still build that solid foundation of what their faith is in. And so if you're high in evangelism, it would probably be a good idea to have those studies with young Christians in order to help reinforce that foundation.
And just to clarify, and I'm pretty sure this is the way you're meaning it anyway, but just to make sure everybody's understanding, when you say young Christians, you're talking young in their faith, not young in years, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yes, young in their faith, not necessarily under 25 or whatever. Is that funny? Very funny. Preaching sermons. So even if we just talked about how maybe the congregation is moved past the point of death, burial, and resurrection, but it's a good thing to come back to if you haven't been there for a while, right? So if we're doing this in-depth book study, it might be a good idea to circle back and let's just do a real, a foundational sermon on the death, burial, and resurrection, or on the good news, or on Jesus and what he's done for me, those types of things. So if you're high in evangelism, and again, this is all about getting started and trying to use your gift more often. Preaching a sermon on it is a good way to get started in that gift. Again, teaching classes that are Christ-centered, because again, everything goes back to the cross. So kind of the same concept as studying with young Christians. But again, if we have a rotation of classes, maybe this would be a good one to include in the rotation. And if you're an evangelist, that's one that you can teach because this is something that you're really passionate about. Not that our classes aren't Christ-centered, but go on faith walks. This is a bit of an interesting one. So this is just walking around in a public place where people are hanging out and just starting conversations with people. I say this every time. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the opportunity we have here in this congregation with a university that has people from all over the world who have different beliefs and different things like that on campus. And so there's a whole world of opportunity on campus to just go and honestly, this is what Kevin does, right? He just goes on campus for several hours a day and just finds people to talk to and starts conversations with them and starts building those relationships. When I was in McPherson, growing up in McPherson, so we actually there's a McPherson college, and then there's a community college there as well. And I would say that if I were to judge my church there at the time, we did not do a good enough job of taking advantage of that opportunity. My grandpa was a deacon there for forever. And he was the one person who actually was trying to get people in McPherson College to come. So he would set up like dinners that we'd have with people with like one of the women's basketball team in McPherson College or other students, and try to get them connected with people in the church. Outside of that, I don't know if they did that as much. So I think that is always an opportunity for us. But Faith Walks can apply to more than just K-State. I just use that because it's a really great opportunity that we have. Start a ministry that naturally attracts new people. So some of us that like golfing kind of have a joke about, not joke, but Kevin talked about how the church he was at had a golf ministry, and Corey and I and Monty and I think Troy were all kind of like, yes, let's do a golf ministry where we have to go golfing every week, right? So it doesn't have to be golfing, but it's something that you can do that people can bring friends to. So like, hey, we're going golfing this weekend. You want to come along? Or we're going bowling. Let's see, what else did I have? Gaming, book club, hiking on the Kanza, There are all kinds of things that you can do to get started that other people can bring friends or acquaintances to. That's fun. And then if you are high in evangelism, those are new people who you now have a connection with that you can start having that conversation with. Okay, those were a combination of what he had in the book and some that I came up with. What other ideas do you all have for someone who is something to take action with if you are high in evangelism? If you have the gift of evangelism. I keep saying high in evangelism.
Find somebody to learn from who is already an evangelist.
Very good point.
I've seen plenty of people who are all excited to share the gospel, which is great, but they have no social skills or tact, or they're lacking in certain, they just don't understand, which is fine. But a lot of the things that we've talked about that are particular marks of the gift of evangelism are things that you can learn, and learning underneath somebody in the sort of apprenticeship sort of model is very beneficial for a lot of these, I would think. That would be my first suggestion.
Yes, a very good point. And we're going to look at it from the other side, right? Being a mentor, but you're right. If you know you're high in something, finding someone to be a mentor is also important.
With the large online community that the younger generations partake in, having like an online ministry where you say just talk about a random passage that's kind of confusing in the Bible. I know there's this YouTuber called Wise Disciple, and he'll do that. I like watching his videos, so that could be effective as well.
Oh yeah, online type stuff raises a whole bunch of opportunities out there in a lot of different ways, like you're saying, like literally starting a channel.
I would say with that, while there are a lot of opportunities, anything you do online should be designed to invite people into actual physical community. It can't stay online. Here's something about Jesus, and if you want to know more, come to the Manhattan Church of Christ, where I attend and learn more about it and meet the people there and find out, why they're wonderful and what they love about Jesus, and meet them and eat their snacks on Wednesday nights and whatnot, right? Because you can't be a Christian apart from the church, and it's an inherently local embodied thing. And so to just leave it as online and just kind of put information out there doesn't really, I think, cut it in terms of evangelism. You have to be inviting people into something.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, agreed.
Wanted to say really loudly, ditto and amen to Aaron.
Brian has a comment.
Say probably, one other thing for me at least is, that passage that says always have a reason. That there's a reason you always have to have a reason. Some of the best conversations about Christ that I've ever had, were initiated by the other party. And, had I not, been ready to just drop into gear and go, I probably would have lost that moment. I think I've told the story in here a couple of times about going to that antique mall over in Columbia, Missouri, and I was wearing a T-shirt that had a cross on it on the chest, and one of the guys that worked there come up to me and said, "So are you some kind of Jesus freak?" And I said, "Why, yes, I am." And we proceeded to have the conversation. So, being able to drop into gear and to take what the other person that you're conversing with is giving you, and being able to run with it, I think is probably a big skill to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as Aaron pointed out, you need to be intentional when you're using your gift, right? So you need to do so. So even if you're starting a conversation with one of these things, what is the overall intent? And so it's not just, again, blasting a message out there. It's following through on it.
I just want to point out, and I wasn't here when you first introduced this class. I'm not usually a big fan of the spiritual gift surveys or whatnot, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're more like personality tests.
Yeah.
If you go back to the last slide, you'll find that I have almost none of those. But when I actually start talking to people about the gospel or about Jesus or whatever it is, that conversation takes off. And it's these things that you figure out how your gift works. So I think it's not just, do you think you have this gift? It's try it.
Correct.
And then when it works, try it more and develop it. As Aaron said, find a mentor, because all of these things are also, just because you've been gifted by it doesn't mean you can't develop it more and more.
Correct. So I touched on that a little bit in the first class. I didn't do as much as I should have on it. But yes, the tests are more, like you're saying, are more of like a personality test. And to me, that's more just like, okay, let's get you in the ballpark of what you probably are. But that's not always a 100% guarantee. So he also talks, and he says that as well in the book. So it's also about then talking to other people about, because we view ourselves differently than how other people view us, right? And so talking to someone else and having them say, what do you think my gifts are? And then another thing that he says is essentially trial and error. So if you think you're good at something, like maybe you do test really high in one gift, and then you start using it and you're like, ooh, this is not working out well. I don't like this. This isn't. Then try something else. And like you're saying, you're like, oh, I just tested low in this one, but I really like when we get going.
The word there is try.
Try, yes.
And
Correct.
find that you're not, then try something else. Try again.
Correct. So Hans said to try. So classes.
I was just going to say what everybody's saying, even David, but that it's an awareness of who you are and your strengths and your weaknesses. And, okay, what are my weaknesses? Now let's find a mentor and help me develop my weaknesses.
Correct. Agreed. So again, the whole point of this class is to start taking action. So as Hans said, is to start trying things. So there are a couple more. We're not going to go through them, but basically looking at this, think about this. If you know someone who this described, how can you be a mentor to them? How can you encourage them? And then think about our church. How does our church evangelize? And if you don't think we're doing a good job, go talk to an elder about how you think we can do better. How about that? All right. Thank you for your time today. Class is dismissed.